Hello everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion on the future of digital identity for a digital economy. I'm really pleased to be joined by three fantastic speakers for this panel session. We're welcoming back Elizabeth to the stage again after the panel you were on this morning, wearing a slightly different hat this afternoon from your experience in the financial services sector, most recently with Santander. We're also joined by Denny Prvu, Global Director of Identity and Access Management at the Royal Bank of Canada, and by Upendra, Mardikar, Chief Security Officer at Snap Finance, and again with extensive experience in the financial sector from Visa and PayPal and others as well. So an amazing lineup. I'm really excited to get into the discussion on this one, on the changing way that we're identifying ourselves to access financial services. As digital services grow, clearly the threat of fraud is still out there, and looking at customer behaviours and the ways that that's changing as well. But before we get into the conversation, I'd really like to start by asking you each to introduce yourselves. So if I could start with you, Denny, welcome, and if you could just introduce yourself for the audience, that would be great.
Hello, and thank you for having me as part of this panel. I have a very unique role as the Director of Identity and Access Management at RBC. I'm also the lead security architect, so I have responsibility for everything employee and consumer based. We're a worldwide bank, and it's an interesting challenge protecting everything from the users to their data.
It's really interesting. Looking forward to getting kind of a perspective from both sides there for consumers and employees as well. Elizabeth, if we could come to you next.
Sure, and thank you for having me on this panel as well as the one this morning. So I'm Elizabeth Garber. I'm a customer experience expert. That sits at the heart of my career, which has also involved user experience, product management, and innovation. It's spanned quite a few industries, starting with, well, telecommunications, energy, data, and most recently banking. I got into identity via a different path to the one Denny just described. I was working on designing onboarding and authentication experiences at a very large global bank. And then I ended up co-editing a paper that argued that banks should be working together to really deliver a paradigm shift in identity. It called for a globally interoperable network for high trust identity assurance. It's also called GAIN, the Global Assured Identity Network. And today I'm also co-chairing the technical proof of concept for that work with the OpenID Foundation.
Fantastic. Brilliant to have you here, Elizabeth. It's great already to see all the different kind of perspectives that you're each going to bring to the conversation. And last but not least, Upendra, how about you? Can you introduce yourself? Lovely to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Laura. Great to be a part of this panel, Denny and Elizabeth. My name is Upendra Mardikar. I'm Chief Security Officer of Snap Finance. It's in the BNPL space, buy now, pay later space. Prior to this, I was with American Express running their identity, so all the engineering, architecture, consumer identity. Prior to that, I was with Visa, and I was one of the privileged ones working with very smart people around me to transform the industry to come up with Google Pay and Apple Pay. So if you go back to 2013, Google, your cards were in your wallets and not on your mobile phone. So how do you do the identity and how do you securely provision those? So I was part of Visa working with very smart people over there, as well as in Google and Apple. And prior to that, I was with PayPal, running multiple security organizations, including login with PayPal and identity of PayPal. So very privileged to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. Such a lot of experience that we've got here today, and so we will come to talk a lot about innovation and kind of transformation that's happening in the space, and there is a lot of innovation happening around digital identity and those sorts of processes. But I would say there's still some challenges, and still certainly some ways that traditional technologies and processes for managing identity are creating challenges across the sector. So I'd like to start by kind of starting with some of the existing processes. So from each of your perspective, why do the existing ways that we manage identity fall short of the demands for businesses today? And Upendra, maybe if I could just come back to you, since you just introduced yourself, for that first question, what do you think are some of the main challenges that you're seeing with how things are at the moment?
Yeah, no, thank you. See, my perspective right now, if you look at the way the world is transforming in identity, right? The main question is, what is identity? If you look at it at the philosophical level, and that has an attribute of who you are, what your credentials are, and then what your behavior is, right? So this entire ecosystem of identity, the circle of identity, and I think Elizabeth, when she was talking about this network and all that, right? So when we think about identity, what is happening, Laura and team, is that we are in the physical world. When I come and shake hands with you and saying that, hey, I'm Upendra, right? How do you believe that, hey, I'm Upendra? And, so you have name, face, and all that. As you translate that into the digital world and omni-channel world, when we have multiple devices, multiple apps, your entire home is smart, your city is smart, having a good handle on identity is very difficult. So there is an identity concept of Upendra in ether, and I'm trying to claim the identity over there. So when we extend this particular thought a little bit further, Laura and team, what is broken right now and what are the challenges is that we are still trying to use the knowledge-based authentication, knowledge-based identity that has been used so far into the new world, and that new world is rapidly evolving, right? I mean, especially COVID has accelerated this. I mean, we would have been sitting in a conference room, for this particular podcast, but we are virtual right now, right? So that is what is broken, is that using the traditional methods or the old methods, the physical methods, into the digital world and translating that directly is a problem right now, that we all, as industry, with Denny and Elizabeth and others, we should all come together and solve.
I think that's very, very interesting, and I like, kind of all the different channels that you mentioned, that there's a challenge existing across, between mobile and web and in person as well. Denny, is that something that you probably see from your role? The challenges across all different channels as you're kind of looking internal and external as well. And well, from your perspective, what are some of the ways that those processes are falling short at the moment?
No, those are definitely some key concerns. We're one of Canada's oldest banks. I mean, nowhere near as old as some of the European institutions, but when you're 100-year-old brick and mortar location, people have technologies and software they're used to, physical hands-on keyboards. Identity proofing, as Upendra mentioned before, is going in, shaking hands with someone and filling out a loan application or applying for an account. And now with mobile access points, and with identity proofing being something like a biometric, a face print, a thumbprint, you are more than just your username and password and an account number. Trying to apply just not only who they are and what they're using, but also the context. Can you perform a transaction from certain places? Can you take out X amount of dollars from different locations or transfer funds? The world we're seeing is changing quite rapidly because of the way people are working and the way we're forced to work nowadays too.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Elizabeth, would you add anything to that? I mean, there's so many challenges that have been raised by Denny and Upendra already, but anything. So when sort of setting out on the GAIN initiative, I know that was kind of set up and designed to look at some of these challenges with the ways identity is managed. So I wonder if there's anything that you would add to what's already been said.
Yeah, so I think I would, but I agree with everything that has been said so far. I mean, for me, I always bring it back to the user and also to not just banks, but other businesses. So for me, the crux of the challenge here is And it's the way that I got into identity in the first place, is really that tension between ease and security. So customers, they want easy, quick accesses to services that they're entitled to. So we need to identify who they are and what they're entitled to. They want to be able to access stuff from wherever they are. They want to be able to recover that access if it's lost, whether that's a password that's lost or a private key that's lost. And despite this increased demand for simplicity and ease, that baseline expectation from consumers, despite all of that, the most fundamental need is that we keep them safe, that we keep their assets safe. And whatever the type of organization you are, whether you are a bank who has to keep money and investments safe, or if you're any kind of business, the expectation is that you're keeping their data safe. So those are the types of challenges that users are placing before any kind of business. And those businesses, which includes banks, they want really long, profitable relationships with happy customers. So to do this, they have to invest in technologies that keep pace with the security environment, the rising capabilities of fraudsters, hackers, bad actors. And we have to do this in ways that delivers an experience that gets better and better, removing friction rather than adding to it. So that's a huge challenge for any business, and especially for those for whom, security and privacy, they're not their core capabilities. And I think that's really where the ideas behind GAIN come into play, that actually other businesses can leverage those investments by financial institutions and others who have to spend money on this kind of security. That's where the ideas of GAIN really come into play and really start to get interesting and start to solve the problems that we see in traditional, username, password, over-reliance, let's say.
Absolutely. I think it's really interesting to hear your perspective on that from your sort of customer experience expertise, and a lot of what you mentioned there was around the kind of experiences that customers are wanting, and kind of the expectation for those. Now I'm wondering how much of that comes from the growth of some very new ways of providing financial services. There's some digital providers in the space and challenger banks. Does that sort of create a pressure for existing financial institutions to digitize their onboarding processes and change the way that they're doing things, because there is that existing kind of other element, the new element that can provide that experience that customers want? I wonder, Denny, is that something that you've seen? Do you feel that there's kind of a pressure as you say, an older, more established bank in the sector?
It's a large pressure, and Elizabeth mentioned something that I found very interesting. She talked about the customer relationship. Yeah. There will always be that community. I'm going to pick up my mother, who has to go into a bank, and that's where she pays her bills. That's where she does things. Where my mother-in-law is completely digital, but she has that threshold of acceptance that Elizabeth mentioned, that if she's going to, perform a transaction or get a money order, she won't do it remotely because it's over a certain dollar amount that makes her less comfortable to do something. Mm-hmm. So there is that. I don't want to say a newer generation. We want things also, as my colleagues mentioned, they want it done quickly, and they want a reward. They want something that's catered to them. In days of old, a relationship, you would walk in and you had a financial advisor. You knew someone that knew your banking patterns and where you invested in, that you had kids and whatnot. Now through artificial intelligence, I want to know that I'm making X number of transactions. I want to be catered to. I want rewards based on what I'm doing. I'm a huge rewards collector from everything from travel organizations to online shopping. And if someone can give me something for doing something that I'm going to do every day anyways, it'd be kind of nice to get that reward.
Absolutely.
Digitization is a big pressure for us brick and mortar shops, for sure.
Yeah. Yes, but yeah, I think, you know, keeping that relationship as well, obviously then comes back to what Elizabeth was saying about the security element. Obviously, you still want to feel secure, whether it's through knowing that you can access those kind of in-person relationships if needed, or just knowing that your data is secure. So I think, yeah, that's also such an important part of the customer experience, as much, or, you know, as alongside kind of those speedy and easy digital processes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Denny, you mentioned something earlier as well. You kind of touched on the changing the changing way that we're working, and the kind of challenges around that for identity. I wonder if we could just come back to that a little. I mean, obviously over the past 2 years, our working patterns have changed a lot. There's been a huge uptake in remote working, and I'd imagine an increase on reliance of digital services, both from customer side, but employees as well. So what have you kind of seen in terms of the ways that this has put pressures on and created challenges for you in terms of managing identity?
I think our space has changed quite a bit, both through regulatory concerns with different laws in the United States, state to state, with GDPR. Now we have requirements of managing users' data specific ways and protecting it. Now, for us, a compliance requirement is not just knowing who has access to what, but for how long they should have it, and should they be allowed to do it from certain locations.
Yeah.
Upendra mentioned context. I've always had a global team, and I always thought it was fantastic. But now, my global team, and I hate to say this, just because you're dialing into my conference call from your child's baseball game doesn't mean I can share the same material with you that I could if you're sitting in an office.
Absolutely, yeah.
So context management is key for us now, and our services need to be aware of what my people are doing and where they're doing it from. So it's using your personal laptop in a Starbucks versus using a corporate provided device. We have to know what you can do and be able to report on it. Someone's going to ask me one day, who's seen this document and should they have access to it, and are they giving it back? So regulatory requirements are huge for us.
Absolutely. Upendra, would you agree? Is that something that you've kind of seen change over the last couple of years? Are there new demands that have been created by new working patterns, or would you agree with what Denny said, sort of about the regulatory pressure there as well?
You're absolutely right. I mean, if we think about it, guys, try to remember March 2020, at least in the United States. I don't know about Canada and London, but at least in the United States, sudden shelter in place, right? And we, as security professionals, we have to enable business, right? So when we invoked our BCP at that time, okay, guys, we all have to work from home, right? Suddenly there was pressure on VPN, and then we came up with zero trust, network access, and then we have to go ahead and react to the fact that the home networks might not be as secure, their routers might not be as configured, modems might not be configured, and then this entire thing where because you are in the home network, smart homes and whatnot, right? I mean, identity itself, right? I mean, is it an employee, to Denny's point, right? I mean, because if you're at a baseball game, I'm just using his analogy, right? Is it that employee or is it somebody else, right? So from the employee and contractors, and then we also have BPOs, across the world. Right. I mean, we have outsourced some of the customer care call centers. So that adds to the mix. And then with the supply chain and third party vendor management, are they doing the same level of security control that we have? So when we are looking at Laura and team at the employee, contractor, third party, that entire thing has to fall in place. And then we have to have detective, preventive, if you follow the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? I mean, all those controls in place, right? I mean, how do you respond to an incident? Now, that is all in the context of enterprise and corporate, right? Now, if you flip that to the customers, right? I mean, we certainly have to enable majority of the customers coming from the online channel. So there is going to be a bandwidth issue. And then we know that the attackers will go after our customers' identity because they are not trained, right? I mean, in the sense that they don't know how to deal with passwords. How many people reuse their passwords across multiple sites, right? So the credential stuffing called password spraying or whatever, kind of classic attacks, that goes, and to Elizabeth's point on fraud, right? I mean, we saw increase in fraud, especially because of the stimulus checks and all that. So to answer your question in short, both on the corporate side, it's a different world because of COVID in the past 2 years. On the customer side, we are seeing more digitization, more neobanks coming up, right? I mean, there was sudden increase in the neobanks. As you can see, most of the customers are going on to neobanks now. And then we will talk, if time permits, on how the crypto and DeFi is evolving in this area and how the Web 3.0 with metaverse and whole 9 yards, how is that changing the identity landscape? We'd love to, share our thoughts and, learn from the panelists here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned a few times that kind of the changing. I wonder if we could explore that a little. So what sort of threats are we seeing when it comes to fraud? Are we changed over the last couple of years? I know there's kind of new threats out there to tackle with every day, but what are some of the ways, Elizabeth, perhaps you could comment on this. What are some of the ways that you've seen that financial institutions are working to combat these risks and, bringing in sort of new technologies and processes there?
Yeah, I mean, you're right to say that there are new threats emerging every day. I think many different challenges out there in the world that come back to identity. So not just people trying to take over an individual account, but are these payment instructions correct? Is this a real invoice or fake invoice? Does this human being really represent that company? Whether it starts with like social engineering or remote access Trojan, these are all the kinds of problems that like business leaders face, and it begins. So financial institutions help by investing in all sorts of technologies that keep users' accounts safe, biometrics, voice recognition, fingerprint scanning, liveness checks, bot detection, all of that. And they need to build the case for always being on the cutting edge to protect their users' assets. But a lot of these questions we started out with might not even begin with a bank interaction, like a fake wire instructions, for example. So I'm going to bring it back to the GAIN paper again. It's one of the assertions of that paper that financial institutions and other organizations like a telecom provider, those who have invested heavily in customer identification and authentication, have a major role to play in the future because they have the opportunity to help their end users maintain control over their identity information, their assets that belong to them, to help them gain access.
Yes.
That in turn would reduce the overheads on other businesses.
Yeah.
And it would help turn the banks or the telcos investments in KYC, AML, and security into more of a profit center than a cost center, which builds the business case again.
Absolutely makes sense. And yeah, it's interesting sort of saying about that business case, because it's quite, I imagine, quite a leap sometimes to invest in a new technology, even though it might be sort of really promising in combating risk. Then there's obviously new risks with new technologies. So sort of balancing all of that. I mean, Denny, would you add anything to that? What's your kind of experience of new processes, working to kind of combat some of those risks and the changing risks as well? And perhaps is maybe education a part of that as well? A couple of times it's been mentioned about customers being tricked or falling victim to different kind of scams, and I wonder if education is an important role as well as technology. But yeah, Denny, what do you think? What would you add to that?
I'm glad you mentioned education because it reminded me of a scenario that Elizabeth brought up. So I thought of, I had a project where I worked with a telco provider because I'm one of those people that has everything linked together for ease and maybe some laziness.
Yeah.
When I want to do some online shopping, I order whatever I need. It will automatically take the money from my account or bill it to a credit card and then ship it to the address that's on file. So I performed a transaction through one of those home automated systems. We'll just, I'll call it Alexa for now. I won't, that isn't specifically it, but, and I asked to order something, but I didn't order it from my place of residence. So the interesting thing that happened was it ordered what I wanted. It sent it to a different address. And it did it because it did voice authentication from the person's home that I was at and authenticated the purchase from their telco, their service provider. So the flaw was, yes, I ordered a lovely new iPhone case for my sister, but I sent it to someone else's house because it wasn't me that performed the transaction because the device didn't recognize my voice and it didn't know that it was me paying for it. So yeah, the way we're doing transactions now has hugely changed. And Elizabeth mentioned some cases around fraud. I think the way we do these things. So in Canada, we had a lot of government stimulus packages, and funds that were being provided. There was a brilliant scam where banks were just facilitators. We pretty much took money from the government and we handed it out to those who asked. One retail individual, and I'm sure you're all familiar with franchise locations, one franchise individual had numerous personal franchises. And the way the stimulus package worked is you apply for X amount of dollars based for X amount of employees. Well, what he did, he was smart enough and reapplied multiple times for each franchise and said, well, I have X number of employees, and he got that package multiple times. For us, we're facilitators. So sometimes we're not in control of the transactions, but we did manage to trigger alerts to say to the government, hey, maybe you should follow up on this person. And follow up is something that I think, and both Upendra and Elizabeth mentioned, I think transactions now in a lot of cases are faceless. We're doing things online. We're doing through voice authentication. How many times will you order something because it's an automatic renewal and in the mail or by courier you get your monthly renewal of X? How many of us actually check our statements to make sure what we're getting is the same monthly transaction we should be paying for? I'm sure most of us look at the bill and go, yeah, that came from so-and-so. I'm good with it. I'm sure there are hundreds of thousands of rogue transactions that customers are missing every single day. So if we can educate those customers, be more aware of what's going on. Don't be so carefree with how you're doing these transactions. If we could do that, I think that would help us.
Yeah, there's just so many processes out there to get to grips with, isn't there? And I suppose sometimes the more processes that are brought in to protect us, the more kind of confusing the picture gets. So yeah, it is easy to see how things can get kind of lost there. Is that something you're seeing as well, Upendra? What I think you've maybe done some work on the role of education in protecting customers and employees from fraud. So perhaps you would echo some of those thoughts of Denny there.
Yeah, I mean, Laura, and I agree with Denny, right? I mean, if we take a step back, right, fraud can happen in multiple ways, and we have to manage fraud, right? Just like stress happens, stress you have to manage, fraud you have to manage, right? And there is a life cycle of fraud in the sense that, there is from the customer perspective, right? What is happening is that customer needs to be aware of that, but that is just a part of the solution, right? There is whole identification of the fraud. How do you come up with preventive controls? How do you come up with detective controls? And should something happens, how do you go ahead and respond to that particular fraud so that the customer is protected, right? I mean, ultimately, customer has to be at the center of this entire ecosystem. Now, what is happening from the attacker's perspective, right? They're gonna find flaws, right? Like Denny mentioned, especially with multiple channels, right? And then we have seen that. I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen Bezos impersonation thing, right, with lapses. So what they said was, over there that, hey, I'm gonna donate, and I started. I want to give back to the community, and here is my public key. If you want to contribute donating, just send bitcoins to this particular public key. No, it was a complete fraud, obviously, and lapses. That was recently, some arrest happened. They conducted that particular fraud. To answer your question, education is absolutely necessary, not sufficient, but it's part of the overall, fraud management, system that we were talking.
Absolutely, absolutely. And alongside that, as we obviously move away from relying on passwords, Elizabeth, I think you mentioned earlier about kind of that balance of security with obviously the customer experience and the journey. Do you think sometimes that all of these sort of additional security barriers that are put in place, things like the two-factor authentication and the different security tokens, it's quite a lot of processes for customers to get to grips with. So as we've said, kind of education is one part of that, but how do you balance that any sort of additional friction created by tightening security with the need to kind of create that seamless experience? It's very difficult, but there's sort of some ways that that can be done, or perhaps some technologies that are promising for making that a bit more easier.
Well, I think a little bit of friction helps us to feel safe.
Yes.
And so I don't think all friction is bad friction, but to really change behavior on a massive scale and to build customers' trust and really reduce reliance on passwords as a whole, I think we have to build solutions that get easier rather than harder. Yeah. There's some great work coming out of FIDO this week. And that's going to speed up the shift towards the passwordless future. It's also, simplification is also what we're going to see if we are able to leverage an institution that we trust to store our identity assets and manage consent. This kind of solution would also help us to support customers who don't want the lone burden of managing our own private keys, for example. That's not just people who are a little bit hesitant about moving into the digital world. It's why we invented banks in the first place. We wanted a partner to help us protect our assets and ensure us against loss. You see horror stories of people who have lost their private keys for cryptocurrencies digging through dumpsters. Yes. I think it's so important that we ensure that our solutions are really considered end to end to ensure that people can maintain access to their identity information and the services that they're entitled to as a result.
Do you think technology like biometrics, you mentioned FIDO, do you think biometrics will become a key part of that? Obviously, lots of ways we're already seeing that being implemented across financial services. I know here in the UK, regulation-wise, there's quite a push from the PSD2 for implementing biometrics. But do you think that that's something that we'll see more and more of?
Absolutely. Although I hope that what we don't see is lots of different organizations storing our biometrics.
Yes.
I think we want to place limits on that.
No, absolutely. But Denny, you're also nodding along there. Do you think that biometrics is going to expand and become, have more of a role to play in authentication for financial services?
I think, and this may come out wrong, but I think eventually we're going to get this right. For years we've been down this path where some of you may remember the Microsoft Wallet, where we contained IDs years ago, and then. I mean, when Estonia came out and said, "Oh, we have a government-run digital ID. This is the way of the world," and now we have 20 plus countries that have government standardized IDs in some form or another, and then self-sovereign IDs. And it's interesting. I worked a lot with the military. Identification cards have been around forever, where you were not a military member, you were a number. You use that same card to get paid, to get your medical benefits, to go shopping at the local PX. things are changing quite a bit. So I think any ways that we can identify these users, and as Elizabeth said, if we can manage who has what bits of our identity, I think that's going to help us out. In Canada, we're finalizing our pan-Canadian framework for common identities, the way certain states have a driver's license for their ID. So we're going to have a common identity. What you can use it for and who you can trust with it, I think, is another level that we should all definitely experiment with.
Perhaps moving towards that more user-centric model of identity, where, like Elizabeth was outlining, and like you've just said, Denny, if customers can kind of have a little bit more control over where and how they're using their identity, then perhaps that would help with the friction. But as we said, some friction is good, obviously, to feel secure. Upendra, would you add anything about this balance of kind of security, the customer experience, keeping privacy as well?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, right, we are at an inflection point in identity, in my opinion. And COVID has accelerated it, especially with all the remote work and shelter in place. And most of people have gotten used to it, right? I mean, people are saying hybrid workforce and all that, right? So if you think about it, the mentality of customer is digitization, but the platforms, the devices, they have not caught up yet, right? I mean, there are lots of initiatives, and FIDO, I was very fortunate enough to work with very early FIDO, right? I mean, from PayPal days, actually. So, I was very fortunate. And now, lots of ex-PayPalians actually started, or were one of the founding members of FIDO. They're doing phenomenal work, actually, to go to this particular point where the authenticators are at the device level, right? So, but that is just a part of the puzzle, right? I mean, we have identity proofing, we have authentication, we have authorization, we have linkages of identity, right? Authentication is one small piece of it. So we know Alibaba and 40 Thieves, right? I mean, that fable where, hey, open sesame and the cave would open and Qasim or Alibaba will go. I mean, those days are here, right? I mean, we basically can steal people's password. In my opinion, Laura, sure, there are lots of initiatives like right now to kill passwords. Passwords are here to stay for at least another couple of years because, the platforms have not caught up, right? just imagine, right? I mean, your smart door, right? Try to enter using your mobile phone into your smart lock, right? It is a Bluetooth connection at that particular point. They don't have any, TEE or trusted, execution environment or TPM into your door lock. Why? Because the bill of material will go up, right? So how do you authenticate into that particular app without a password, right? So it is the PIN, password, whatever, is here to stay. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm more into that camp right now. Not that I love it, but it is here to stay is what I'm a little less optimistic about that. Hey, we will go into the passwordless world. However, I understand that from the identity perspective, when you are thinking about the overall identity, there are multiple dimensions, right? I mean, the device that you are coming from, right? I mean, the platform that you are using, multiple devices, the connections between multiple sites. And Elizabeth mentioned a brilliant point, and I also tried to do the similar thing at American Express, where we try to create a network of identities, right? I mean, if you are using another partner, third partner, how do you come up with this ecosystem so that we know that this is Upendra going from one side to another and create that network effect so that the identity is just not the knowledge-based identity, but it becomes more like an ecosystem of all these things that we talked about. And Elizabeth also mentioned about crypto a little bit ago, with 3.0. The thing is, the private key in customer's hand with user-centric identity, especially when users are they don't know how to protect the private key, because private key needs a passphrase. Passphrase needs, that means you are again relying on a password, at that particular point, or a passphrase. And then you will need a hardware wallet to do that. How many people are really going to do it, right? So that's where the key custodian comes in. So where there are going to be key management services in the cloud, right? I mean, I'm using Upendra's or Laura's or Denny's keys managed inside of the cloud, and that's where then you need a password for that. So it's a infinite vicious regression problem. So,
I
so
like
that is
the
what
balance
we're
of that
looking
slightly less optimistic view there, Upendra. Denny, would you agree? And Elizabeth, passwords are here to stay, or do you think that we will sort of see the end of passwords, or is it more about just reducing reliance on passwords rather than kind of saying no more to?
I don't know if they're ever going to go away, but I do see, we've talked about a lot of the users, their identities. I think we should also be concerned about the data that's associated with the identity, and how people gain access to it. I think of the future, and everything that I do now is recorded in one way or another, where I go, what I've been, what I've bought. And as a financial institution, we're here to make money. I mean, we're here to loan out money. We're here to make money. And the only way I'm going to do that is off of transactions. So if I can sell data, sell transaction information, know that, Elizabeth purchased a smoothie for lunch, and then, I can monetize on that and sell that information to someone else. Maybe that's something that we have to be concerned with as well. So how are we going to protect what Elizabeth has done, or where Upendra has driven to today? So I think we have some other things to be concerned with too, over and above just the identity. There's a lot that's part of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Elizabeth, I see you nodding along there. Would you agree? It's kind of protecting, the privacy of where and how that information is stored as well, and perhaps that sort of more self-sovereign kind of concept that you mentioned maybe will become a key part of that. Sort of using a digital ID or a wallet, kind of beyond financial services, but centered around the user. Oh, I think you're muted, Elizabeth.
Sorry. Am I? Thank you. Yeah, I certainly hope that we begin to reframe. Oh, there's so much to unpack here now. I really hope that we move away from passwords, reduce our reliance on passwords, and the fact that we have 150 of them, towards a place where individuals are in control of their identity information, and not just identity information. To your point, Denny, I think it's critical that we have a framework for at least ensuring that our data, all of our data, our identities and what we use our identities for, is safe and under our control, and that we know where it's going. So to your question about digital ID and wallets, Laura, I think it could mean that we have digital IDs and wallets that we manage and maintain on our own, or that banks could begin treating them as if they were, our assets, and that they could help us manage those assets. The global financial system is really kind of well placed with its regulatory frameworks to at least build off of that, to ensure that it has a strong foundation of regulatory frameworks to ensure that we can begin to evolve the right kind of regulatory system. Sorry, I haven't really thought that through.
Yeah, exactly what you mean. The bank kind of has that regulated, and that foundation in obviously having to prove identity as part of that regulation. So perhaps they can kind of vouch for our identities beyond financial services, I think is what you're driving at there.
Yeah, I do see that as a possibility in the future, and I think we're going to see that more as a service offered outside of banks before we see it between banks, because we still need to be duly diligent about KYC and AML policies. And if we do start to see this happening, it's going to be the first movers who are going to be at the top of any identity wallet as well.
Absolutely. Well, I'd love to keep chatting to you all. It's really interesting, but we are coming close to running out of time. So I thought just to finish on one final question, might be fun to just ask each of you for a short view on what do you think that the bank of the future will look like when it comes to identity, and perhaps, you know, are we kind of close to enabling that vision, or you can go as as out there as you want, or perhaps, you know, to tell me what's kind of just coming around the corner. But yeah, the bank of the future. So Denny, if I could start with you.
Wow, I have so many things that I can envision for the bank of the future, but I'll pick one topic that I see that we're feeling quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Our talent pool is changing quite a bit.
Mm.
COVID has really driven this, the access to information. And I mean, years ago, I could go to any one of my peers at any of the banks and say, do you provide services and solutions? And they say, yes, we're a software shop.
Yeah.
Because that's what they did. They developed things. With crowdsourcing and the gig economy, where employees are contractors and short term, specialty knowledge is going to be a big thing. We have so many legacy systems kicking around that I don't think you're going to see someone working at a bank for 20 years anymore. I think you're going to see rapidly changing environments. You're going to see a lot of mobile workforces. I'm excited to see it, and I won't lie, I'm a little nervous because I'm one of those people that doesn't jump ship very often.
Oh.
So it should be an interesting world coming up. But yeah, looking forward to the bank of the future.
Absolutely. Upendra, what about yourself? What would be kind of your one key point for what the bank of the future will look like?
It will be more like a SaaS, right? I mean, and you know, essentially the way there will be custodian of money, so that basic function will continue. But on the top of that particular basic core, if you will, which will be more regulated, making sure that, you know, the AML and, you know, all those kinds of things are taken care of, the government regulations, if you will. But on the top of it, the way I see all these guys transforming themselves with digitization and all that is a platform in a SaaS with a connected economy. So that is how I see the banks evolving.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Elizabeth, final thoughts on this.
So big question, Laura. Thank you. As we've all said, there's a lot changing. I think it's safe to say that the bank of the future is going to be largely digital. I think we can all safely say that. I also think it's safe to say that there's a lot going on. There's decentralization, there's DeFi, and it's going to change the nature of money, the process of storing it, the process of moving it around the world. New types of assets are being created, NFTs, for example. I think identity information should be treated like an asset, and I think that the financial institutions of the future are going to be doing that. Although it remains to be seen to me, I think we're going to see some traditional financial institutions remain tightly bound to their customers. They're going to be looking for these opportunities to get involved in more and more transactions that their customers are involved with. This is an example of a new way of adding value to them. And then there are going to be some that, you know, might become disintermediated or commoditized, or may choose to distance themselves from those customer relationships. So I think we're going to see a little bit of both, and it's going to be super fun to watch.
Absolutely, I agree. So lots of innovation, lots of change, and lots to watch out for there. So no, I love that. I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you all so much for joining me. I've learned a lot just in this short time talking to you. I could carry on the conversation for a while, but that is all we have time for. So I'd say thank you all for joining us. Have a lovely rest of your day, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.